open, closed, or half-open intervals. Example 1. What type of interval does the following inequality represent? X is less than 5. So if we notice here, the inequality does not have a line underneath of it, so that would mean that there would be an open circle at 5 or a parentheses. So this is what you would call an open interval. Example 2, what type of interval does the following inequality represent? 5 is less than or equal to x, which is less than or equal to 6. Notice that there are lines underneath both of the inequalities, which means that it's going to be a closed circle or brackets for the interval, and so that means that it's going to be a closed interval. Example 3, what type of interval does the following inequality represent? 5 is less than x, which is less than or equal to 6. Notice that on one of the inequalities there's a line and on the other one there's not. So this is what you would call a half-open interval. There would be one open circle, one closed circle, or one parentheses and one bracket. Example 4, write each algebraic expression using interval notation. So our first example, we have x is less than 2. So since there's no line underneath the inequality, that means we're going to have parentheses, and we're going to have parentheses on both ends. X is less than 2, so that means it's going to go towards negative infinity. So our interval notation would look like this. It would be parentheses, negative infinity, comma, 2, and then with a parentheses since there's no line underneath the inequality. The next is x is greater than 2. So this time x is going towards positive infinity. So we're going to start with a parentheses at 2 since there's no line underneath the inequality, and then it goes all the way to infinity. Notice that with the negative infinity and with the positive infinity, we always will have parentheses no matter what, with the negative and positive infinities. Next we have x is less than or equal to 2. So x is still going towards negative infinity, and then we have a line underneath the equality at 2, so that means there's going to be a bracket at 2. So in interval notation, it's going to look like this. It's going to be parentheses, negative infinity, comma, 2 with a bracket. X is greater than or equal to 2, so we have a line, again, underneath the inequality. X is going towards positive infinity since x is greater than or equal to 2. So we're going to have a bracket at 2, and then it's going to be comma, infinity, and then parentheses. So again, no matter what, even though we have those brackets, we still have parentheses where the negative infinity and the positive infinities are located. Next, we have negative 2 is less than x, which is less than 2. Both of the inequalities do not have lines underneath them, so that means it's an open interval, which means we're going to have parentheses both at negative 2 and 2. So that's what that would look like as interval notation. The next one, we have negative 2 is less than or equal to x, which is less than 2. Since we have a line underneath that first inequality, there's going to be a bracket at negative 2 and then a parentheses after the 2. We have negative 2 is less than or equal to x, which is less than or equal to 2. And so since they both have lines underneath the inequalities, that means this is a closed interval. So both of the numbers are going to be inside of brackets. So negative bracket, negative 2, comma 2, bracket. Next, we have negative 2 is less than x, which is less than or equal to 2. So that first inequality does not have a line underneath it, so we're going to have a parentheses at negative 2, but then we'll have a bracket after the 2. With this last example, this is what you would call a half-open interval, because one of them is open and then the other one is closed.